This podcast is supported by Goldsmiths Chambers. Based in the heart of the Temple in central London, Goldsmiths Chambers is a leading multidisciplinary set that is committed to providing expert advocacy and quality legal advice. Their barristers are instructed to attend and appear in courts throughout the country and beyond, from the Magistrates Court, Crown Courts, tribunals, and county courts to the Supreme Court and the Court of Justice of the European Union. For all your legal needs, check out their website, www.goldsmithschambers.com. Good evening, everybody. My name is Vinesh Mistry. I'm a junior barrister at 8 DAC Beechcroft Buildings, and welcome to this evening's Law Simplified podcast, proudly supported by Goldsmiths Chambers. Tonight we have a very special guest. He is a criminal defence barrister called in 1993, a star of social media, and the deputy head of crime at Goldsmiths Chambers in London. We have this evening Mr. Dominic De Souza. Dominic, hi, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Good stuff, good stuff. Thank you for joining us today. We're really hoping to have an insight into your careers today and what you've learned and what you've seen over the many years of your practice at the criminal bar. Dominic, getting started now, really for our listeners and viewers out there, just tell us a little bit about how you got into the criminal bar and how you got to where you are right now.
Okay, well, it seems an awful long time ago now, actually. But I think I slipped into the bar by mistake. When I finished at university, I had half an inkling that I'd want to be an actor, but in those days that wasn't a particularly secure employment option. So simply, I think because I didn't want to start work, I started the LPC course, and I was lucky enough eventually to get pupillage. And it was only after I started pupillage that I thought, you know what, I might quite enjoy this job. I've got to say from the outset, it wasn't the best start. I remember my first criminal trial was at Isleworth Crown Court, and I was before Judge Miller, Killer Miller, we called him at the time, and I'll never forget it. My client was charged with murder, with burglary, and the main evidence against him was this witness who used to be his friend, who was a murderer, and was a recidivist criminal. I mean, he was in and out of prison all of his life. And when he came to give evidence, because he was an escape risk, there was enhanced security. And when he went into the witness box, he was handcuffed to a security guard. The whole trial was going pretty badly for me at the time. It was just a flash of nerves, and I remember cross-examining him, and the case was going dreadfully because he'd been cross-examined at that stage by more barristers than I had ever cross-examined witnesses. And I thought, you know what, at least I can put his previous convictions to him, tell the jury what a horrible man he is, and that he's not someone who should be believed. And I was about to do that, and just as I was about to ask him about it, the security guard that he was handcuffed to fainted. And so he fell out of the witness box. The witness was pulled with him, and they ended up rolling around on the floor like a couple of copulating snakes. The jury were laughing their heads off, and that wasn't even the worst part of the trial. I then called my defendant, who was mad as a March hare. I don't even think he knew I was his barrister, which was probably a bonus, I suppose. And when it got to my closing speech, I remember this was the first case I'd ever done. I fessed up to the judge that it was the first time I'd been in a Crown Court, and I said, look, I'm a bit nervous. Do you mind if it gets to 4 o'clock if I do my speech the next day? Because I was hoping to prepare it overnight, and he sort of tetchily said yes. But it got to about 20 to 4, and the prosecution finished their speech. The judge looked at me expectantly, and he said, yes, Mr. De Souza. And I thought, oh my God, I've not prepared a single thing. And I said to him, well, can I have overnight to do my speech? And he said, no, you'll do it now, Mr. De Souza. So I asked for 5 minutes or so, and he huffed and puffed at the jury and stormed off the bench. And in that 5 minutes, I had my grandmother, who was coming to watch my first trial, so she was Zimmer framing across the courtroom to say, Dominic, what's going on? I had the defendant, who was mad as a hatter, in the dock. And when the jury came back, I remember this so clearly. I'd written out with my Mont Blanc pen that my grandfather had given me when I was called to the bar. It used to be a tradition that you'd be given a Mont Blanc. And I'd written out in this fountain pen, my name is Dominic, and that's about as far as I got. The jury filed into their rows, and I remember looking down at my notes, and this bead of sweat sort of slipped its way underneath my wig, and then came down to my nose, like in slow motion. I saw it fall to my notes below, and it smudged the one line that I'd written. Anyway, I have no idea what I said to the jury in the next 25 or 30 minutes, and I can only assume, because the defendant was acquitted, I can only assume that they thought, with a barrister like him, this poor chap has not got a chance in hell. Anyway, after that case finished, that was my first ever case. And after it finished, I took the solicitor's clerk to the pub for lunch. And by the time I finished with him, after a couple of wines and a nice roast or something or other, he was satisfied that the only reason this chap had got off was because of my brilliance. And that was the story that went back to the solicitors. Nobody knew about what a disaster it had been. And sometimes at the bar, that's why an element of luck. I think you make your own luck at the bar. And I had a very early start in that way. And so things worked out well for me. But, even till to today, I've been at the bar now almost 30 years. I still get that feeling that it's all luck, or that I shouldn't be where I am. And I think I'm not the only barrister who's like that. I think lots of barristers are in truth perennially insecure, because the nature of our job is so stressful, and trials really sometimes turn on a dime. As a job, I wouldn't recommend that anybody comes into the profession either for the money, because they feel like it, and that's why they call it a vocation. Vinesh, I think there are three vocations. You're called to the bar, you're called to be a priest, if you get a calling from God, and medicine. Those are the three callings. And so, but if you do get called, or if you do feel this compelling drive to be an advocate or to be a lawyer, what I can say is it's the most, on the one hand, wonderful and rewarding profession, because you do things that, as you know, having started in the law, that genuinely and truly make a difference to people's lives, and that's a privilege. It's always been a privilege.
I can certainly wholeheartedly relate, because you never ever forget your first trial. No, and you never ever forget the first time where you think in your head that it's all gone down the toilet, and
horrible
all
feeling.
You have
it's a horrible sinking ache in the pit of your belly,
and yet we still do what we do.
And yet we still do what we do. We crack on. There are good results, there are bad results. Life for me is full of postmortems. Could I have done it differently? Was my strategy wrong? Did I get enough sleep last night? Did I, for once, prioritize a dinner with my wife over a cross-examination with someone else that I should have prepared? The problem with our job, the downside, the upside is, I've already explained to you, the wonderful feelings you get from doing something real. Downside is, it always comes first. Because I couldn't sleep at night if I hadn't done everything that I could for my client, because you're the last stop shop for him. So you can't go out, you can't have a headache, you can't not feel like it, you can't want to have a romantic time with your wife, or go out with your buddies. Work always has to come first. So but that's the nature of calling, I suppose.
No, that's very true. That is very much life at the bar. And to be fair, that actually segues quite nicely onto what I was hoping to talk to you about first. So I don't think we can have a podcast involving you and involving the criminal profession without having some discussion how the criminal bar has been impacted over the course of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, we know with certainly LASPO back in 2013, legal aid has been cut. The cuts keep coming. How has the criminal bar fared over the last 18 months, 2 years?
I can't help but feel disappointed and profoundly sad about what has become of our criminal justice system, and for my part, the bar specifically. Over the almost 30 years I've done this job, I'm conservative with a small c. I have never one day forgotten or taken for granted what a privilege it is to do my job in circumstances where I have genuinely believed until very recently, that our criminal justice system was the envy of the world, because it was. It was the benchmark by which all other criminal justice systems might wish to set their sights. As a result of continual government, and this is not party political, this goes across the board, continual underfunding. The bar was, and our criminal justice system was at the point of collapse, in my view, well before the pandemic.
Yeah.
The reality is that the investigation of crime, the prosecution of crime, and therefore the defending of it, has become more and more labor intensive, more and more complicated as the years have gone on and technology has advanced. When I started at the bar, Vinesh, it was 1 in 100 cases that involved, for example, really complicated mobile phone or technological evidence, cell sites, etc., etc. It was 1 in 100 cases that involved really complicated forensic evidence, DNA or medical evidence. That now is 99 in 100 cases. And so on the one hand, what that means for prosecuting authorities is that prosecuting cases is far more difficult. But for those that defend, the position is exactly the same. In any one of any criminal trials I do now, I've not only got to be a barrister, I've got to at the same time be a quasi-doctor or understand medical evidence. I've got to be a quasi mobile phone or data telecommunications expert. I've got to be a quasi et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the demands on those who are involved in defending crime have become more and more burdensome as the years have gone on. Cases involve the generation now of huge amounts of unused material, one way or another, and the government are simply unprepared to pay for it. And so far as our criminal justice system is concerned, morale is pretty low, I think, amongst the bar for the first time in a very long time. And this is uncontroversial. You'll know, for example, all the efforts that are being made on our behalf by the Criminal Bar Association. Joe Sidhu, Queen's Counsel, who's recently taken over at the helm, has very strident views about the way in which the bar is being treated. I see cases now where there is simply a complete failure in the disclosure exercise, and that results in controversy, and controversy of the wrong sort, Vinesh, because, for example, I think just tonight on Channel 4, there is a program about the Somerset Police Force and the way in which they deal with rape cases. And after that program, I don't know what it involves, I just saw the advert, there apparently is a debate about the prosecution of rape cases and who is it that's on trial. And I understand absolutely all of the concerns of women and those individuals or interested pressure groups about the low conviction rates in rape cases. But of course, I only defend, I don't prosecute. And I see things from the other side. And just because there is a failing in one aspect of the way in which a particular section of society are dealt with in a particular type of case, that doesn't mean that there are not problems on the other side also. And I have to say, Vinesh, I get this feeling of dread when I'm asked to defend a rape case, because they are so stressful. Because the way in which the media have become involved as a result of failings that are in fact legal failings in the justice process, legal failings that had they been resolved as they should have been properly, perhaps they wouldn't have come into the public domain or be available for public purview. As a result of that, when I look at a jury across a court in a rape case, I assume well, not even assume, I can feel the enmity from them like a Sahara wind when I haven't even stood up and said my name, because public perception has been skewed by the media so much now that I hope this is not controversial, but I have to say, my view is it's tough for an innocent man to be acquitted in a rape case. And so, that's just one of the ways things have shifted so far as the bar is concerned. But to answer your question directly about the pandemic has resulted now in a backlog of cases that is so large. The reality is it's going to take 5 or 6 years for that to be resolved one way or another. Yeah. I've had cases, Vinesh, that where defendants who have been in custody for 2 years have had their cases listed at the back end of 2023. I mean, it's unconscionable. Now, on the one hand, I can appreciate that, of course, there is a public interest in keeping potentially dangerous individuals in custody. But for those that are acquitted, very recently, I was doing a murder case, and my defendant was found not guilty. It was clear that he was going to be found not guilty. It wasn't my brilliance as a barrister, although I like to think it was. But he was in custody 4 years almost. By the time he came to trial and was acquitted. And as a young man, 4 years, he was 21, 4 years is 1/5 of his life.
Yeah, and you can't make that up, can you?
You can't make that up, Vinesh. And there is no recourse that you can have. There is no compensation that you can get. He lost his house, he lost his wife, he doesn't see his kids. He comes out, he completely disenfranchised. He's lost those incredibly important 5 years of his life when he might either have been in college or starting a job or a career move. And so it's in a terrible situation, the courts. The courts are doing now, and I think this is down actually to individual resident judges and the judiciary generally at each court centre, who are doing their level best to get cases through the courts, to keep counsel and lawyers happy, and to be accommodating. And the judiciary generally, I have to say, they've reaffirmed my faith in the law, because they have done so brilliantly in trying to do what they can in a powerless and terrible situation. But there are stories about court roofs falling in, courts being unavailable through leakages, people turning up all the time for trials that don't get on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as it happens, I've seen on Twitter, there aren't enough barristers to do the cases, one way or another. I went to a Nightingale court for the first time, I think a week or two ago. I mean, the government should have rolled those out across the land. Mine was at the Jury's Inn, which was an irony. You can say the jury's back, the Jury's in when you get a verdict. But I mean, those should have been used a lot more. And at the end of the day, I appreciate that the pandemic was something that no government or no overseeing institution could have planned for. But the reality is that I appreciate that with the voting public, the law is unpopular, because as a member of the public, I suppose you might think that is never going to affect me. It's not my problem. They're only criminals anyway. They deserve what they're going to get. And so money, of course,
until you need the system, isn't it?
Until you need it, Vinesh. That's absolutely right. Yeah. And for that part of the reading public who think that it doesn't affect them, fair enough. You might not be a gang-related murderer. Fair enough. You might not be a serial killer. But your son, who's at Cambridge University or Durham, or doing really well, who you're so proud of, the chances of him perhaps one day saying, I got into a fight with the students' union, I didn't mean anything to happen, and the glass broke, and before you know it, he's charged with an offence. That member of the public, who had previously been so contemptuous of any money spent in our judicial system, would suddenly change his view as night follows day, and hope very much that their son, loved beyond anything else, was defended in the way that we had hitherto known that anybody in this country charged with a criminal offence would be defended.
No, of course, I completely appreciate that. I mean, you can kind of draw parallels almost with the NHS system, and that is to say, well, look, I'm funding the NHS system, I'm not actually getting much out of it. You can say exactly the same thing about the criminal justice system, but it's once you need it, once you have a burning desire for it, then you see what's going on with it, or what's going wrong with it more specifically. Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. But so far as the NHS is concerned, of course, Joe Public, it's a more popular court, so far as Joe Public is concerned. And also, I don't know why the bar are the way they are. In a way, we're the authors of our own misfortunes. I remember when junior doctors striked. It was organised, it was effective. They got their message across to the public, who understood that even though Grandad was not going to get a cataract operation, there was a reason why they were doing this. When it came to the bar, was our representation as effective? I don't think many people would say that photographs of bewigged barristers being on strike outside Southwark Crown Court with a Gucci handbag or Prada shoes was ever going to endear the public. But the reality is, as you know, there are junior barristers now who are traipsing across the land. They're travelling overnight for £30 in a hearing.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Where their fees are costing them more than they're getting paid. All because of a drive to stay within the profession and a feeling that you want to be a barrister and make a difference to people's lives.
Which very naturally, thank you very much for that, Dominic, takes us into the next thing that I really wanted to talk about. So I appreciate that certainly for me, my drive for joining the profession, becoming a barrister, is about advocacy. It is about the intellectually stimulating, challenging cases that you work on day in, day out. Now, as I said earlier, you were called in 1993, which I must inform our viewers is the year that I was born. So sorry for that.
Thank you for that. Makes me feel very old indeed.
But there are plenty of years of experience to draw on. So tell me, Dominic, what has been your most interesting case?
You know what, Vinesh, there are so many for so many reasons. It's difficult to sort of pinpoint one over the other, particularly because sometimes it's not even the size or the importance of the case that makes it interesting. There are those that are just small for me, I suppose, but very important for my clients. Those cases sometimes produce the most incredible twists and turns, but for the purposes of your podcast, I suppose I'll think on some that I suppose would be interesting to your viewers. I do an awful lot of murder, as you know. And I have.
But you're not participating in it.
Not participating. No, not yet, anyway.
It's still fine.
Recently, I've done an awful lot of gang-related murder cases, many of them involving young kids. And I have to say that I've become really concerned about the way we deal with gang-related crime, and particularly young people in our city environments who have become involved with gang-related issues and or violence and or drugs, because there is no doubt that whatever policy is being pursued at the moment, it's ineffective. When I started at the bar, if you got a murder case, you know, the big M, as a barrister professionally, I mean, your heart would beat faster because it was so rare. There weren't so many of them around. I mean, now they're like Skittles, and I do more murders now in a year than I did, in decades when I first started in terms of my practice. Yes, I did once. This chap, his name was Carlos Orango, and he was accused of murdering his infant baby. The prosecution case was that he had shaken her to death in a baby shaking syndrome, effectively in a fit of rage. And the evidence was that it was tragic because when he called 999 from his home, what he said was the baby had fallen off the bed whilst he was making the Christmas tree, and they were trying to revive the. You could hear the baby die almost die on the police recording. They got her into hospital, and of course they whacked this baby full of antibiotics, and eventually, a few weeks down the line, they turned off the life support, and the defendant ran out into the corridor of the hospital saying, "I've killed my baby, I've killed my baby." And the prosecution relied upon that as evidence of a confession. It wasn't, in fact, because he was being led to believe that it was his fault. One way or another. Anyway, well before it came to trial, the prosecution were relying on this medical expert And this medical expert was saying that the hemorrhaging behind the eyes of this infant baby was so bad that it was akin to a traffic accident. And so if a car at 70 miles an hour hit a tree, of course the car would stop, but the baby's brain and all the rest would keep going. And that was what was causing all the hemorrhaging. And I just had this feeling, if you don't know this now, Vinesh, you'll know after a while in the profession, when you've been in the job for a while, you just develop this instinct, this sort of sixth sense about whether, and he was so uninvested in the case, the defendant I was representing, Carlos, he had no care or concern in the world about whether or not he was convicted of murder. He didn't care whether he went to prison for life or not, because that compared to the question of whether or not he was responsible for his child's death paled into insignificance. His only issue was, do I have to live with being responsible for the death of my own child? And so I just couldn't give up on this. And this expert that the prosecution were calling was this world-renowned expert, and so many convictions in the past had depended on his evidence. So many mothers and fathers had gone to prison on the basis of his evidence. So I had to hunt around. I had a brilliant solicitor who was instructing me at the time, Richard Harbord, who eventually found this expert, who looked at the evidence and he said, "Are you mad? This boy should not be prosecuted, this poor man. He should be hugged and consoled and bereaved with. This is not a murder." He said, when you look to the spinal fluid of the baby, it was literally chock-a-block with white cells. And he said, white cells fight infection. That's what they're there for. And he said, when you do another test, there's absolutely no glucose there. And that's because they're eating it all because they're so busy fighting infection. This isn't that baby, he said, had bacterial meningitis, rapid onset bacterial meningitis. And he said the reason why we're never going to discover the truth one way or another, because of course hospitals aren't in business of prosecutions, they're in the business of saving lives. So the minute that baby came in, they whacked him so full of antibiotics that it would cover any infection. You just wouldn't know. So there we are. We went to trial, and on the one hand, you had a world-renowned expert saying that boy is guilty of murder. On the other hand, you had our expert saying, I don't know what you're talking about. That's a matter of sort of geographical postcode stuff. If that case came before my desk in another part of the country, I would be at his funeral grieving with him. It's come across yours and he's charged with murder. And for the first time in my career, I think I realized, and I was shocked to realize, that in terms of professions that I'd considered vocations, pure and without agenda, for the first time I realized, in actual fact, that's not entirely true. Because you had two doctors, eminent individuals, each within the area of expertise, who were utterly one of them was right and one of them was wrong. No doubt about it. But neither prepared to compromise, neither prepared to say that the other side may be right. And I wondered whether, looking at them, they were just advancing their own careers, their own standpoints, their own medico-legal research, their own written articles for medical publications through this court system with a defendant who was on trial for murder, and that was upsetting to me. But the thing I remember about that case most of all was when Carlos came to give evidence. He went into the witness box, and you could have heard a pin drop. And when I looked at him, a man so utterly a shell of his former self, so completely unconcerned or even unaware of the fact that he was on trial for murder, so utterly and fully focused upon the fact that I can't say myself if I'm responsible for the murder of my child. I just need you. I need you as a jury to tell me whether I am, and I have to live with it, whether I can let it go.
That's so emotionally draining to be able to involve.
I had a lump in my throat, and I've never forgotten it to this day. As I was questioned, I was shaking. It was difficult to get him through his evidence. And why have I told you about this case? Oh yeah, the reason why it's one of the most memorable for me is because it was a hung jury at the end of that trial. The jury couldn't decide one way or another. That was appalling for the defendants, of course. But when I look back on it, utterly understandable, because how are a jury to decide in cases that are criminal cases, dependent upon expert medical evidence that is one side or the other, with no other independent evidence one way or another suggesting what may be the case. So, for example, in Juan Carlos's case, the police in investigating the case had gone to every single person on his estate or anybody who knew him to say, what's he like as a father? Of course, if there was evidence that he was abusive, or then that would assist in his criminal trial. But so far, nobody had anything bad to say about him at all, other than he was a wonderful father. There was nothing that would help one way or another with how this whole thing happened. The reason why
I think a jury's best placed to be able to deal, because that's a very, very specific factual allegation that needs to be made and needs to be established.
And you're right. And so I don't want your readership to regard what I'm about to say about this case as being in any way supportive of the fact that we shouldn't have juries in criminal trials, because we should. And there are those that say that so far as our criminal justice system, that we shouldn't have juries. I know Richard Enriquez, former Court of Appeal judge, very recently was interviewed, and he was saying, juries don't understand or this or that, and we shouldn't have juries, especially with the pandemic. We really should have trial by judge. It's a better form of justice in any event, etc., etc. I don't mean to do any disservice to his submissions, but that's it in summary. I disagree with that entirely. No matter how complex a case is, in normal criminal cases, that ones that aren't dependent entirely upon medical evidence or expert evidence, no matter how complicated the case, no matter how long it runs, criminal cases come down to, did you do it or didn't you? Yeah. Were you dishonest or weren't you? Were you involved or weren't you? And so juries are so well placed to come to those decisions. But this case was entirely different, Orango, because I should have been unsurprised, actually, at the end of the day, the jury were unable to agree, because I didn't know myself one way or another. And there was only medical evidence. Anyway, his case was then referred up to the powers that be. And as a result of what the governmental findings were in that case, it changed the law. And now the position is that CPS protocols are that there should never be a case that is prosecuted in circumstances where it's dependent entirely upon the view of one medical expert as against another. And so I'm proud of that case. I often think, actually, when I think of Sally Clark, the lawyer who committed, well, I don't know whether she committed suicide or not, but she died of alcohol poisoning, having been released from prison when she had been charged with the murder of her 2 infant children. And the case against her, of course, was dependent, again, in that case, entirely upon medical evidence. Yeah. An expert, Roy Meadows, who said that it was about, I can't remember what it was, 800 million to 1 or whatever it was, that 2 cop deaths could occur in the way that it did. He said to the jury that it was the equivalent of backing at the Grand National an 80 to 1 outsider and coming first, not just once, not just twice, but 4 times. She was convicted of the murder of both her children when she went to prison with them because she was a solicitor, because her father was a police officer, because she was accused of murdering her 2 children. Yeah, you can imagine the hard times.
No, of course, it's a horrible thought, isn't it?
3 years later, she was acquitted, but she eventually committed suicide. But the issue is, the thing is that I like to think that had her case been tried after the case of Orango that that she never been prosecuted at all. So that's an important case to make because it provides protection to all those who might otherwise be accused.
No, of course. I mean, it really makes you think and wonder and sit down and actually pick apart the criminal justice system as it works at trial level. And not many people do that, because you think to yourself, well, how do people actually prove what they say is alleged to have been done? And then not many people realize, again, going back to the Joe Public idea, that you sometimes need to get doctors and experts involved in these sorts of ways.
Yeah.
And sometimes, unfortunately, the hard truth is that some are probably partisan, though they may
Yeah.
not necessarily want to admit it.
That's right.
But then sort of segueing then from murder, I mean, what about any organized criminal gangs that you've been involved with? What's
Organized crime
interested you there?
cases have become more and more prevalent as you know
Hmm.
the policy and drive but behind policing has been to target that type of offending. So I do an awful lot of that type of work. There are funny stories and there are serious stories about that. I remember one case, Chinese snakehead people trafficking. It was one of the largest cases at that time ever prosecuted, the police having effectively infiltrated and bust open this snakehead people trafficking ring. And my defendant's name was Wang Qingchun. There are elements of it that are farcical and funny, but there are elements of it that are very stressful because those cases involve masses of police intelligence that you may or may not get to the truth of one way or another. You may not even find disclosed. They're predicated upon, and this is unusual for the investigation of crime. Of course, in the normal course of events, a crime is committed, and those that we trust to investigate cases on our behalf, the police, you and I as Joe Public, we assume that they start with a crime and then go on to decide who it is that's committed it. In other words, it's an open investigation. Yeah. The investigation of organized crime, of course, is predicated upon a diametrically opposed position. The police, through intelligence or this, that, and the other, come to a determination who has committed the offence first, and then come to try and fit the case around that presumption. And so I'm not sure whether that would occur to Joe Public immediately, but you don't need to be Einstein to see immediately the huge dangers that type of investigation would lead to.
To fit the narrative, don't you?
Well, quite. How susceptible it is to corruption. How with the best will in the world. And so that type of investigation started off from very small decisions that were made in policing. So 25 years ago or 30 years ago, there was Delroy on the Cold Harbour Lane, dealing in crack day in, day out. But the police just couldn't get him because he was so clever. And by the time they came to arrest him, somebody else on the estate had taken it, or something was in his mouth and was gone. And that copper then says, you know what? You know, who the hell is going to have a problem with my saying, you know what is this that was found? Fitting him up, effectively. I'm only doing a good thing, thinks the police officer, because this guy is a scourge on that estate anyway. But it's that small type of intellectually flawed emotional and moral reasoning that is then led to some of the most explosive miscarriage of justice cases, a lot of them being those where in organized crime investigations. And I have done a huge number of cases now, a disproportionate number of cases involving organized crime that have taken years to investigate and prosecute, have involved the huge expense by the prosecution authority that have then suddenly collapsed as a result of disclosure issues, as a result of corruption, as a result of concerns that the court uphold as to the way in which evidence may or may not have been obtained. But they, in fairness to the prosecution, they're very complicated investigations. And coming back to what you asked me about right at the beginning of our chat about the state of the bar, those cases are now becoming those, in fact, where I think defendants are probably most vulnerable because there simply isn't the money, there simply isn't the impetus or the resources to either investigate them or, so far as the defence is concerned, to properly prepare and leave no stone unturned, etc., etc.
And have you found that with your own cases that you've gotten so far in the criminal trial process, and either the prosecution has not been able to offer up evidence, or there has been a disclosure issue that's essentially meant that your client has found their way out of the situation that they're in?
Oh yeah, I mean, there are so many. So I mean, any barrister will tell you that in our criminal justice system, if you were to say statistically, which area, or which type of case may result in, for example, it starting and then falling apart as for legal issues or as a result of disclosure issues, etc., etc. They are inevitably those larger cases that are prosecuted within our criminal justice system, and that needn't be so. It's not that those cases are more susceptible to defence challenges or I don't know, specialist legalese that sort of wriggles a defendant out of them. It's not that at all. It's because they are not properly prosecuted. It's not because they're not properly investigated, and it's because it's not until the 59th minute of the 11th hour the defence are in a position to properly challenge those things. That really comes down to the training of our investigative authorities and our police officers, and the resources, the financial resources that are committed to those type of cases. Because, of course, there is a pressing public need to investigate and prosecute them. Otherwise, the position would be, if you want to be a criminal, be so big that they never get you.
Yeah,
That was the. I mean, you've got to read the newspapers about Russian oligarchs and this and that, and who owns property in Chelsea, South Kensington, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all those things. And so every often it comes around cyclically. The government saying, you know what, we're going to clamp down on money laundering, huge scale money laundering, criminality committed on governmental scales, blah blah blah. My view is, if you're going to do that, you just have to throw enough money in it that you prosecute them properly. Otherwise, you are just wasting your time. You're wasting public resources. You're wasting taxpayers' money, and these acquittals that result are embarrassing to the government. They're embarrassing to the SFO, the Serious Fraud Office, and they're embarrassing to the NCA already of the investigative departments that prosecute them, and that needn't be the case.
No, that's completely appreciated. It's certainly, it's certainly embarrassing. It can be. I can completely appreciate that at all. Now, Dominic, I mean, it's clear that you have got so many stories to tell, and I could certainly listen to them all evening, but we do have to slightly shift the focus of our podcast now. So I'm presenting to you a little challenge, should you wish to undertake it.
Sure.
That is to say, you have got 2 minutes to explain or otherwise simplify the law on murder. Now, I will start the timer, or I'll start my stopwatch. And you have got 2 minutes to get it all done, starting now.
Well, if you can't do it in 2 minutes, you're not a great barrister anyway. Murder is killing someone, causing their death in circumstances where you either intend to kill them, or at the very least intend to cause them GBH, which is grievous bodily harm when they die. The two offences of homicide are murder and manslaughter. They're the only two in this country. Manslaughter can be committed in one of three ways. It can either be that you cause the death of someone intending, just like in murder, to either to kill them or cause grievous bodily harm, but you got a defence like diminished responsibility, what used to be called provocation, or as part of a suicide pact. That would reduce it to manslaughter. The second type of manslaughter is negligent manslaughter, a grossly negligent act that you should have foreseen might have resulted in their death. And then the third area of manslaughter, the one that is generally most problematic, is called unlawful act manslaughter. That's where you don't intend anything at all, but you commit an unlawful act. And so if you were out, Vinesh, celebrating the 2 years that you've been a barrister, and you got into a bust up with someone at a pub, pushed them over, didn't intend anything to happen, but they fall on the corner of a curb and they die, that's unlawful act manslaughter. So there are three offences really of manslaughter and one of murder. They represent the homicide offences so far as the UK law is concerned. Am I within 2 minutes?
Actually, yeah, 1 minute 30.
There we are.
Rose the challenge there, Dominic.
Oh, that was clear enough.
Brilliant stuff. But thank you very much for simplifying that.
No problem.
I've actually always been a fan of people who take the opportunity to take complex legal issues and otherwise distill it down into like a 60-second video or a little podcast or a little talk on that, because I'm very much about ensuring that legal knowledge, and including law knowledge of procedure, is actually disseminated to members of the public.
Well, you're right. That's why I said to you earlier, law can be very, very complex, but there is no reason why any juror, any individual within this country can't sit on a jury and understand exactly what murder is and exactly what manslaughter is. And they're the most serious offences that are tried within our courts. And if they can understand that, they can understand anything.
And you've just provided a 1 minute 30 explanation, so life's good at that point. Right, we've got some questions from the public now that we'd like you to answer, Dominic. So the first one is this. How do you deal with the pressure of defending someone knowing they could face years in prison?
As part of the job, you just have to push that down. It's something that comes with training. It's a huge stress at the beginning of your career. I've said to you earlier, I think just now that, almost 30 years down the line, I still get that sense of butterflies in my stomach. The stress of it never really goes away. But I suppose it's like, that's why it's a vocation. And I suppose if I decided, in another world to be a doctor, and I ended up a surgeon, how do you deal with the stress of, operating on someone who may die, that you may exactly the same thing. And that's what a vocation is. You have to just be able to take on board and accept the consequences of the decisions you make in your daily life and the way in which you perform. Some things are outside your control, some things are not. But to answer your viewer's question, it is a stress. It's probably the most enduring stress so far as my practice at the bar is concerned. But I can deal with it, I suppose, with sleepless nights and a lot of coffee.
The second question we've had asked is, have you ever felt intimidated when you've walked into a prison cell? I have. There are very few truly psychopathic people that I've defended in my career, because the majority of individuals who are guilty of and do commit crime, whether they've got mental health issues or not, they do it for a reason that they understand at the time they do it. I did a murder case once involving an individual who, for satanic purposes, felt that he was committed to doing what he did. And the minute I entered the cell in prison, when I went to see him in conference, it was as if all the air from the room was gone. And I stared at this chap and, looking him in the eyes, realized at that moment that he was probably one of the most frightening individuals that I'd ever met, only by virtue of the fact that I could see he had no conception of what it was to be human or humanity. And I've found myself in my career far more frightened by that which I can't understand, that type of thing, true mental illness I find disturbing, than I would by a bully or by somebody who is aggressive, or those things you understand. And the nature of the way in which conferences are conducted, our position, me as a barrister and him as a client, they generally vitiate against those things. So I'm unconcerned by people who are bullies or aggressive or violent. In my careers, it's always been stuff that I can't understand, psychoses where people just think in a completely different way that I find frightening. And that's probably just because it's unknown. Sounds terrifying, though.
Sorry,
reminds me of one of a civil practitioner.
I don't have to be overly frightening, but you ask the question, that's the answer.
No, very true, Dominic. Thank you very much for the candor. Right, I think that now brings this podcast to a close. So thank you very much, Dominic.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope it makes for a good read.
No, I've certainly had a wonderful time, and it's been very, very interesting to listen to you. And a big thank you as well to Goldsmiths Chambers. Now, this podcast and all the others will be available on all of the Law Simplified social media platform, and that's all of the social media platform as well as the website, which is law-simplified.co.uk. I'm also told that we have a special TikTok for those who are following. It's at Law Simplified UK. That'll be released involving Dominic. And Dominic, I sincerely hope you've got a dance in store for us. So that'd be incredible. So it's a goodbye from me. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. We hope you have a great rest of your day. And Dominic, again, a big thank you for having us this evening.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you very much.